Hey there, I'm Maya Monell, and this is Powering Performance, brought to you by Bridge Athletic. Each month, we're joined by some of the most well-respected coaches and trainers in the industry to take a deep dive into what makes their organizations great. In our first episode, I caught up with AS Roma's Director of Performance, Darcy Norman, and Head Performance Coach, Ed Lippy. Together with their staff, Darcy and Ed have helped guide the organization to one of its most successful seasons yet, making it to the semifinals of the Champions League for the first time in 10 years. During the show, we cover a lot from the club's performance facility revamp, like introducing dunk tanks for underwater machines, to the nutritional kitchen and staff rooms. We then buckle down into the challenges and unique insight gained from managing a team spanning 13 different nationalities, as well as how to create and streamline a culture around human performance. Needless to say, there's a lot of great insight to unpack. You won't want to miss a minute. Hey, Bridge Coaches, I'm Maya Monell. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by our top performance specialists, Bridge Masters coaches, and frankly, an overall fantastic coaching duo, Darcy Norman and Ed Lippy. Darcy and Ed are at the end of a very exciting season at AS Roma, leading up their performance team there. So I'm thrilled that we were able to catch them for this episode. Welcome to Powering Performance, and thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks
Appreciate
for having
it.
us. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, really excited to get this going. So I think to start off, it always seems natural when we have a couple of coaches on to help our listeners kind of understand how you all got together, training at Roma, and so if you could first kind of kick it off by telling me what led you to Roma.
Yeah, I'll let Ed run with the first part because it really starts with him. So I'll let him take that one.
Yeah, so I guess the chronology starts in 2013 when I was asked by the president of the club to do performance audit with another colleague of mine, Brian Dew, who was the strength coach of the Boston Celtics at the time. And so he and I came over in August of 2013, and we did an audit of the performance program, and that led into a 2-year consulting agreement whereby I was coming over here 4 or 5 days out of every 7 or 8 weeks to advise on different programming and different performance issues. And so over the course of that time, I was asked to facilitate a search for a director of performance because over the time that I was consulting, it became more and more clear that a reorganization was required to achieve the ambitious goals that the club had set from a performance perspective. So Darcy and I had known each other at that point for about a year or so. We had been connected by a couple mutual friends, and it was right around the time I had started consulting because these mutual friends had said, hey, you should connect with Darcy Norman. He's worked with Bayern Munich. He's worked with the German national team. You guys could probably talk some shop and you might get something out of it. And so that started a dialogue that, through email and phone calls. And so when I was asked to conduct this search, which was part of this reorganization that I mentioned, was my first call. And it was a bit of a fishing expedition because I knew that he was pretty successful in what he was doing, and so I didn't want to necessarily come right out and ask him if he was interested. But I asked him if he knew of anyone that was interested, and he would say yes, that he was in fact interested. And I think lucky for me and lucky for Roma, that's exactly what happened. And so Yeah, so he agreed to join Roma in March of 2015, and for the couple months prior to us arriving in Rome, we kind of started working on the back end to start organizing what we wanted to do once we arrived, kind of give them a lay of the land of what was already here, and how we might want to hit the ground running once we arrived in Rome at the end of May, beginning of June. So yeah, so that's kind of how the whole thing kicked off.
Yeah, no, interesting. And I'm kind of curious to hear more about, really what you two were walking into, and even more about that kind of auditing process, Ed. I think it's certainly interesting to hear from your experience on, how you came into a team and how you really evaluated the needs going forward, and knowing obviously that Darcy would be a great fit. So could you describe, or maybe one or two of you describe kind of how what you came into and what that looked like?
Sure, I'll let Darcy take this one.
Yeah, I mean, Ed gave me a background around the club and what he had consulted on in previous things with rehabs and just the communication within the group, the technology capacity of the group, just the facilities and so forth. And so we basically, just started making lists and grouping it between facilities, the strength and conditioning side, what needed to happen from a rehabilitation, return to play programming, what was available on the nutrition side, the integration from all that into the tactical area. Gosh, am I missing anything? I think those were the bigger items. And we just kind of, saw where the club was at those places, started prioritizing, what needed to happen first, and then, moved on from there.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I wonder if you all don't mind kind of elaborating on, some of those buckets you talked about, S&C, of course, and rehab, and some other kind of overarching performance needs and what needed to happen, and how has that developed, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, so there was a good existing staff that was already here on the medical side. So great physios, a good doc. So we needed to supplement that system. We brought in another doctor, Helge Ruppenoff, fantastic guy from Germany, had tons of experience in a variety of sports. And so he was a massive addition to help on that side from an integration process. Ed led the kind of everything in the gym from a performance side, with a couple existing staff members that were here. So it was trying to upgrade those guys so we all had a similar thought process in dealing with athletes. And then we didn't have a nutritionist at the time. So it was a consulting person that was coming in kind of once a quarter, so to speak, and doing some plans and evaluations. And we just felt like nutrition was massively important to the club. And so needed that to be a full-time role. So we ended up eventually, I think after about 6 months, hiring a full-time nutritionist that ended up being a nutritionist for the club, but starting off with the first team and then kind of working his way down as he had time and resources. Wow. From a facility standpoint, it was pretty clear out of the gate. The club really hadn't done a lot from its initial inception back in the 70s. Obviously there's just machines and equipment brought in various intervals. And so it was kind of very ad hoc, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we basically gutted the whole gym. We blew out some walls, put in some glass walls, glass sliders to add in more natural light. So it was basically a whole new gym. So right when the season ended, we got to work demoing all that, tagging what we're keeping, what we're getting rid of, order everything, and kind of get that process. So the gym was ready to go when the season started. Actually, when it ended up being reasonably ready when we got back from our Australian tour. And then in the spring, we ended up finishing a recovery area, which included hot, cold pools, a regular pool, and then kind of a dunk tank with underwater bike and treadmill capacity, Bodoo jets, and so forth. And then steam, sauna, so just kind of a whole recovery area from a pool standpoint. And then the following off season, we ended up gutting the whole kind of
The first floor of the
first floor of the facility, which included adding staff rooms for meeting rooms, which there wasn't existing at the time when we started, upgrading all the office space, kind of rearranging things to make it the workflows work better. The nutrition kitchen, which is where our nutritionist is based and has everything he needs to supplement the athletes. And so, yeah, and then, like I said, improve the overall workflow. So just when the athletes come in and move from the locker room, they always are constantly passing by the nutrition kitchen. So whether it's pre nutrition stuff or post nutrition stuff, that stuff is always accessible and easy. We're always passing by it on the way in, on the way out. So those have been probably the big ticket items. I think, there wasn't a history of data with the club, a little bit here and there, but we tried to consolidate everything into a data system. From medical records to daily wellness to RPEs to testing data to GPS data to other tracking data of equipment, like Driven, for example, and Bridge, Bridge and the Nordboard, groin bar, First Beat, all those things, just all the data pipelining into one space. So it was a big ask, and it's taken time to, accumulate that data to be able to report the data back and use it on a consistent basis to have more informed decisions from day to day.
And I guess I'll just piggyback some of those comments by saying that I think, the objective was, the primary objective was to create an ecosystem that supported a performance culture, which was something that, kind of existed to a degree, but was something that we wanted to enhance and felt like we needed to enhance in order for the club to reach its potential. So we initially targeted those things that, okay, well, what are the things that we can create and put within this ecosystem that will support this culture of performance? And so, like Darcy mentioned, the facilities was one of the obvious places to start. Sure that, the place in which players and staff came in every day supported our concept of what high performance meant. And also just to supplement what Darcy said on the nutrition side, because I think it's worth mentioning in the typical arrangement in Italy among football clubs is that they have this consulting arrangement with usually a professor at a university, and he's usually a professor of endocrinology or something along those lines. And like Darcy mentioned, he comes in on a periodic basis, do some blood draws, and drop off some meal plans. And based on our experience in the U.S., we felt like the everyday presence of a nutritionist was critical to support our concept of high performance. And so, to my knowledge, we are still the only club in Serie A with a full-time, day in and day out, a nutritionist that comes in and reports to the club every single day.
Wow, really? It's almost surprising, right? In this day and age where we really value nutrition, just as much as we do what's happening, to the pitch, to the weight room and back again. That's certainly interesting. And I'm also kind of curious, to hear a bit more about certainly the goals you had laid out, at the beginning when you were obviously going through this massive structural change. And also, I thought it interesting, Darcy, that you mentioned the workflows, especially as you talked about, creating meeting rooms and staff rooms, for the team, for the performance team. But how did that really change your dynamic with, your other staff members, your other coaches?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to communication and flow of information. And so the more efficient your workflows and spaces are, the more up to speed everybody is in unison. So, and then the more you can just maximize your technology, you can maximize your space, which really just ends up with more time that you can spend the athletes individualizing things. But if you don't have a framework to stand on, then it's really, it's just super chaotic, and I think that was one of the issues prior to the arrival, is that, if you wanted to train a certain way, you went with that guy, and if you wanted to train another way, you went with somebody else. So you really had multiple different programs within one program, which made it difficult for the players to feel like everything was being taken care of. And so as a result, some players would maybe bring in their own physios or, see a different doctor. And so just having those workflows made the communication much more efficient, which created a higher confidence level to the player of what was happening, that, and in turn improving the product, that they could then feel confident that all their needs were being taken care of. And so, like, for instance, how it works today, now that we have all these workflows and systems set up, so I can let the nutritionist, he operates totally independently, and he goes, and so he'll schedule players for evals, and as soon as he inputs something into the system, all the key people get alerts that that player had a new evaluation done, and they can quickly click on it, see what the results were. So then, say I might be in the gym and he had it an hour prior to, like, when he arrived, and now he's walking into the gym. I've already got an alert as soon as the information's entered, so I could say, hey, Bob, I saw that you met Guido today and got measured. Your body comp's looking awesome. This is going through. And so he's like, as he's transitioning from one area to the next, people are already informed of what he's been up to and what he's been doing, and we can address that immediately when we see him. So everyone is telling the same story and hitting that guy on different levels. So they're like, wow, these guys are really, everyone knows what's going on. And that breeds such a big confidence piece to the athlete, that now they feel like their needs are being taken care of and they have everything they need to execute on what it is they're asked to execute on.
It's really interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I think I would also add that, Darcy referenced the fact that there were individual players kind of seeking outside help with strength and conditioning or physiotherapy or whatever they felt like they needed at the time. One of our mandates was to come in and provide a cohesive performance strategy and culture, similar to what Darcy was saying, people would eventually trust in and not feel the need to venture outside the club. So one of the things that helped to facilitate that was maybe like 4 or 5 months in, kind of after we had tackled some of the bigger items. As a staff, we created our own performance team mission statement, which put the athlete at the center of all of our decisions. And I think that also helped us as a staff get on the same page and help guide certain decisions. And I think for the players, knowing that was our mandate and our mission, I think also helped breed confidence in the process that we were developing. So there was kind of all those factors that I think initially helped, and then we just have to maintain and consistently educate players as to why we do what we do. It's a big part of I think establishing trust is informing the players why we're doing, because I think sometimes even when you get to this level, players are just used to kind of following orders, and oftentimes they have questions as to, why are we doing this exactly? But one of the things that we work hard on, which isn't always easy in a language other than our own mother tongue,
Right.
explain the reasons why we're lifting on a certain day, or we're doing this particular exercise, or we're tracking this or that. So again, once players realize it, then they're more open-minded to it, and like I said, that just adds to the confidence of the overall program.
Sure. So I'm kind of curious, and I think we spoke to it briefly. Certainly with the mission statement, I think is a really interesting point there. But did you all create with the existing staff some kind of finite goals, at least for that first year, once you got everything up and running, and frankly into the end here? Do you have some kind of finite goals in place, and how are you meeting those and tackling those?
Yeah, I mean, I think the goals which we talked about were kind of the big chunks. When we first started, all as a staff before the season got started, we kind of went on retreat and just went through with everybody, what were the issues in the past? How do they see this performance team moving forward? What were the roadblocks? What were the things that were really holding back good service to the athletes? And then, Ed and I, because we'd been kind of working on our game plan for a while, we presented our concepts, which really all fell in line with what the staff was saying, which was great. So we didn't have to really adjust much. Then it was kind of living in the house and seeing what worked and what didn't, and be like, oh, the couch is better over there. So you go over there, and this works better this way and that way. So there's certain things that in your mind you may think like, okay, this is how we're going to run it. But once you get in, you realize that, hey, you got to move some of the furniture around to really let the system work. And then, it's letting the system work and reviewing every year what worked, what didn't, what were our injuries? Did we do well here? What did we miss here? And then what things can we put in place to mitigate that moving forward? And so, that's kind of the space now. Each year was a little different, like adding, at the beginning, we didn't start with bridge, but that was one thing we wanted to track more the load in the gym and have some objective numbers there. And so that's when we got on board with bridge and started implementing that stuff. So that's just an example. There's been so many kind of goals, some big, some small, some that happen from day to day, week to week, year to year, month to month, that, and some of it you don't really know. You got to kind of live through the situation to test your systems, to see how they stand up, and then try and strengthen those pieces in the off season or when you can to move forward.
No, certainly. I think that certainly makes sense. And along those lines, we're often asked what will be the initial challenges, right, to new systems, new methodologies that you put in place. Can you speak to any of those initial challenges that you all face and how you tackle it? I know it's often a pain point, but it's frankly I think it's interesting thing to talk about because there's so much overlap. I would say or within our industry on those initial challenges when you need to kind of confront those issues, but also when we're talking about high performance and what that's now developed into, it's not just, your average strength and conditioning program anymore. It's so much more, like you said, the nutritionist, a huge component. And it's certainly interesting to hear what you all have to say about those challenges.
Yeah. There's tons, right? It's never ending. I would say like just some of the big ones, to just run the analogy of games versus training. Everyone only sees the game. Right. So that's what you because that's the end game is the game itself. So when you think about a program, you just think, oh yeah, we're going to be lifting, we're going to be lifting a few days a week. And then it's like, okay, well, how are you going to track the numbers? How are you going to know who did it, who didn't? How are you going to then taking it a step further would be like, okay, we all have to get on the same page of what this exercise, we should call this exercise. So what's our naming structure? And then when we're building the programs, what's the, are we, it's a game day -3. So what does that mean? What workout are we going to do on that? But it's only a 4-day game week versus a 7-day game week. And now you're in day -3. So there's just all these variables that you never really thought about in your, when you're just kind of going on it from an individual basis. You're just kind of thinking in your mind, like, okay, this is what we did, this is where we're going, okay, this is what we're going to do today. And you have some structure around that. But now, you add in a second person. So I might have my thoughts around that, what I would do. And now Ed walks in and he might have a little different naming structure and a little different thought process. So how do you streamline all that? So, instead of 4 people rowing 4 boats, you got 4 people rowing 1 boat. And, that's where it really starts to get challenging, where you're like, man, I've never really thought about a naming structure for 2,000 different exercises where anyone can walk into the gym, pick up a tablet, open a program, and know exactly what that means.
Right.
And so, because when you think about our clientele, I would say football is one of the most diverse sports in the sense of scheduling, how many games a week they play, and the variability of that. The players, they all come from, I think we have 13 different countries represented within our squad, 14,
Wow.
And they all with different languages, and they all come with different histories on how they became professionals and arrived at Rome. So you're dealing with a ton of different variables and different attitudes, belief systems. So that's just a small taste of the challenges that come up. And so, if you just think about trying to organize a weight room, that's one piece. And then same thing when you have to organize the GPS, same thing. What are we going to call this exercise? How are we going to track it? How are we going to, what does it mean to the coach? There's just all these different variables, because when you're dealing with data and tracking stuff, it's essentially a big database. You need that structure to be able to quickly and easily go back in history and gain the information and knowledge from it. Because if if we have 10 variations of the same exercise, when I go to click variation number 1, I'm not going to get all the data from the variation, because they're all named differently. So it's important that we name stuff the same. So when you click on that exercise, you get all the data related to that exercise, not the 10 different names of that same exercise.
So I also would add that, people in general tend to look at everything through their own particular prism. So like most of your listeners, Darcy and I are performance guys. Darcy's got a physio and strength coach background. I've got a strength coach background. But I think it's important for your listeners to realize that when our players show up, they're not coming to a strength and conditioning or performance center. They're coming to a training facility for a professional European football club. And what we do with regard to performance falls within that larger context, whereby, like Darcy was saying, ultimately people only see what happens on the pitch on match day. And so, how do what we do from a performance perspective fit within the larger context of this football club? So that means piecing our part of the puzzle with the technical staff, and what we're doing in the gym, how does that relate to what's happening on the pitch on that particular day? So obviously that's a big part of the challenge too, is this, making sure that everyone is reading from the same page within the performance group. But then that's just one piece of the larger puzzle. And so we've got to make sure that, everyone is on board with what's happening. And so I think, to Darcy's earlier point about European football being certainly probably the most global sport on the planet, that's certainly a challenge, because you're talking about melding different ideas in different languages, from different cultures, and not just, ethnic cultures, but performance cultures, et cetera. So that's certainly part of the challenge.
Yeah, it certainly seems like there are quite a lot of factors to take into consideration, and you throw in the 13 different nationalities, and a pretty decent sized team. So I can imagine that, bringing in these different systems are certainly an interesting challenge to face, and I would say that you all face it tremendously well. So, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the structure that you've established. We spoke a lot about the development. It sounds like you all can probably put interior design on your resumes by now, in terms of the actual facility that you've built out. It's quite impressive. But, I've come across some interesting interviews from you both where you consider the value in controlling all of those factors that we've talked about that affect rather an athlete's performance. And it seems to have that link to those concepts of what you both consider to be supply chain management. And certainly, I think that that's a very interesting and at least to my knowledge, unique way of looking at kind of your performance methodology. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about that and how that has developed within Roma, but also within how you two have taken away what you've taken away from that experience in developing it, and how that affects your training methodology now.
Yeah, I think they're just some business theories that we kind of follow. One is the supply chain management, the other one's more around complex systems thinking. And really they provide frameworks to help wrap your brain around difficult circumstances, because there is so many variables. Sometimes it can get super overwhelming. And so the supply chain management, just different terms, like there's the reductionist approach and the holistic approach, and both are important. There's the practitioner and then there's the scholar, researcher, right? And they're important to the outcome of performance. There's the parts, right? All the checklists and the pieces and all the, when you're going down the checklist that you're accounting for. And then there's the interactions between all those parts. And so complex systems thinking is more around the interactions between the parts, and supply chain management is really the building of a program where it's more of these checklists, building a product is supply chain management.
Right.
So you have to plan. You have to source your materials, which is finding, in our case, on a soccer team, it's really about human resources, right? Good players, good staff. Obviously, then it's your equipment and hard goods. There's then you have to make the product, right? So what kind of training are you using? Kind of rehab methods are you using? Treatment methods are you using? Evaluation methods are you using? So going through those checklists. There's the returns, which is your rehab policy or return to play. So once a person is broken or a product is broken, you got to figure out how to put it back into circulation so you can make money on it or use it to win games. Then the workflow and logistics of it all, like, hey, when they go from A to B, so talking about more of the workflows within a space, and then you actually have to sell products or win games, get goals. And so there's that piece. And so it translates really well to that kind of business theory, and which also bridges the gap from more the leadership or executive group, which is what they know in their training, right. And how we relate it to ours. And then the complex systems thinking is more around how we interact with each other from a day-to-day process, right? Like it is a dynamic system, like your body, it's constantly changing. There is no necessarily homeostasis. You're either getting better, or you're getting worse. And so there it's around, each individual person and what they bring to the table. Again, no different than a team on a pitch, is you have different players that all have different qualities that provide different roles, and they all look at the game differently. But we have to all get on the same page to come up with a playing strategy to go against our opponent to win games. And so there's the individual, there's the how they look at the game, what they call the mental model that they make decisions from. And within that, like I said, it's the shared ideas of the group that creates your playing model of how you're going to go win the game. And then within that, how do you continually train together to become more and more efficient and learn quicker as you go along. And so it just has provided tons of framework to help us work through difficult scenarios. And I think just taking the time with the communication with the staff to also go through these principles has led to invaluable conversations that you might not otherwise have or know about a situation of why someone makes a decision in a certain circumstance. And once you know that, then it makes it much easier moving forward.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense. Again, I think it's a unique way of presenting, the value of the program and what you all are trying to accomplish. A bit more about that. I'm curious to see how you all communicate just the overall methodology and how kind of deep you go into this description of your workflows and your processes when you are introducing it to an athlete, kind of what worked, what didn't work, how receptive are they to this kind of new structure, and what I would imagine is a pretty unique way of thinking about, training right off the pitch day to day.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the player is also a person in the process, so you have to include them in the decision making. So, like when a player is injured, you want to get them to put their finger on a day on the calendar and say, hey, I want to try and be back by this day. If this game is important or this is important, given the circumstance, what we know about their injury and so forth, what do they think is a reasonable, return to being back with the team? And then from there, you can work your way backwards of saying, okay, these are all the milestones that you need to achieve to meet that goal. So maybe one day when they're like, man, come on, do we have to do another round? I don't want to do another round of this, or I don't want to do this. Right. You can say, hey, if we don't remember what we laid out, if you don't do this, then that affects the next step, which affects the next step, which affects reaching that goal. Mm-hmm. And so then, okay, let's go. And so it makes it easier for everybody because we all know where we're trying to go and how long we're taking to get there. And it's never a perfect plan always. And so you can deviate from the map, but at least which direction everybody's going. So you can deviate off course, but it also makes it much easier to get back on course.
Sure.
And so again, the more systems you have in place, the easier it is to kind of readjust to the scenario.
Yeah. I think people sometimes look at systems as being too rigid, but I think I can speak for Darcy on this. I think we both are big believers that creating systems actually allows you to be more creative, because if you've got a framework that you can fall back on, it kind of frees your mind to come up with some creative tweaks that you might not otherwise think of if you're still trying to kind of think of the nuts and bolts of what you're trying to do. So to have that process, I think has been valuable for us just to be more creative, even on the human level, because not players are people too, like Darcy mentioned, and each of these guys are sometimes you have to use some individual means to reach them, to motivate them, and but it's helpful that they know what the process is. It's helpful that they know, okay, if my goal is to get back on this date, I need to check off these different boxes. So I think that's helpful, because now players who have been here for a while know that, okay, these are the steps I have to go through in order to make it back from an injury or whatever the situation is. So I think that's been helpful.
A simple analogy would be like freeway, right? You have freeway with 4 lanes going one way. So the freeway is going in that direction. You can drive on the far left, you can drive on the far right, you can drive in the middle. In Germany, they prefer you always move to the right. So people that want to go faster can go on the left, or in North America and in Italy, people can drive wherever they want, essentially.
Whatever speed they want.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, that traffic is going that way.
Right.
And, that's why, like Germany, for example, is a very efficient system, because they've organized it that, hey, when you're not passing somebody, you move over to the right. And so now it allows people in the system to go on the left really fast, where in North America or Italy, because they drive at variable speeds and it's not as organized in those regards, now it holds up and creates some congestion. And so, but again, everybody is moving in the same direction. So I think that's, back to just sum up what Ed is saying, if you're really organized, it gives you actually a lot more freedom in the long run. So it's to get there, but it certainly helps in the long run.
No, certainly. I think that makes sense. And before I get to our next topic of kind of tracking and your progress there, I kind of always like to ask this of our coaches, but if you could go back in time and tell yourselves one piece of advice about how best to establish the program and the methodology that you all have created together, what would you tell yourselves?
Ooh, I'll let Ed run on this. I have to think about it for a bit.
If I could go back 3 years from now, I would say spend more time learning the language, because it's, we've gotten to a point where we can communicate in the gym with players because there's a context that we're all familiar with, and our Italian is good enough by which we can communicate what we want from them. But some of the, we have, I think we mentioned 28 players. About half of them have some baseline of English, and there are some that have none at all.
Interesting.
And so I've certainly noticed that with those players that have some level of competency in English, it's way easier to have those nuanced conversations other than just kind of directive conversations. And that also is true with the coaching staff. I think it's, again, it's our Italian is good enough to get by in terms of communicating basic things, but in terms of having those more nuanced conversations, that's, I wish I had a better facility with the Italian language, just in order to communicate the way I would like to.
Right.
I would, I was just going to say, I would absolutely second that. It all boils down to communication at the end of the day. And so you need to have the right, like, it's hard enough to organize this stuff in your own language,
right? Let
alone do it in foreign language,
right?
Or in languages,
right?
So yeah, it's, I would have to totally agree with Ed on that one.
No, and I think it's interesting too, and maybe something, at least when we first started working together, something that I guess our team here doesn't really interpret as well. And I would say maybe a lot of the U.S. based teams might not have that kind of pain point, but also player communication is certainly, that might be 13 different nationalities. Is that often an issue within the organization? I mean, are they all speaking Italian in some form, or I'm kind of curious, just what's that dynamic?
Yeah, it's a lot of charades. I would say, yeah. I mean, communication is how you express yourself, and when you can't express yourself, you get frustrated, and that adds up into stress.
Yeah.
So it can be definitely a massive piece of the puzzle. We try to mitigate that. We have translators on staff, that obviously English to Italian, but then you have Bosnian, Serbian,
right.
Czechoslovakian, Turkish, French, Spanish. It's
Portuguese.
Yeah, I mean, it goes on and on. And so it can certainly be a pain point, because you think like, oh, I'm just going to explain this to these guys and we're going to carry on. It's going to take 2 minutes. Now it's turned into a 20-minute trying to translate and, charade session of what you're looking for. You hear a lot in coaching, like coach like a caveman, and doing it in a foreign language certainly is coaching like a caveman. So it's trying to do less with more on the communication side.
I've also realized just how important context is within language and communication, because, for instance, our players, they've all played, by this point, they've all played this sport for most of their lives. Sure. And so on the pitch, that provides a context in which they're all pretty comfortable. And when you move to the locker room or you move to the dinner table, and it's that context is no longer there. And so, I think until players kind of learn one of the two common denominator languages of Italian or English, and really Italian is the one that they should focus on, then it's difficult to communicate off the pitch. Yeah. And difficult to communicate off the pitch. It's sometimes difficult to establish the human capital that is necessary to become, a really good teammate. Yeah. Because I think there's a certain level of chemistry and caring that exists in the most successful teams, and until you can create that human capital, which starts with communication, it's difficult to do that. So it's So I think it's an issue in the sport in general, because it is such a global sport. I was just speaking with one of our players here this morning about one of our players who was sold to a foreign club during the January transfer market, and he's in a country where he doesn't really he's not really able to communicate in the native language, and it's been very difficult for him. And it's he's a great player and he's a great person, but it's just it can create a lot of problems, and it's something that I think North Americans, like you were mentioning, really just it never comes on their radar, because you just kind of always take for granted that people are always speaking the same language. I think especially for English speakers, just one of the things I've realized is English as your first language is a little bit of a blessing and a curse, because you can pretty much go anywhere in the world and you can almost find someone that will speak some level of English or be able to get by. Whereas, which is helpful on one hand, on the other hand, because you could almost always find somebody that can speak your language, you're not forced to learn sometimes the language, the native language of the country that you're in, which I think was a little bit of our issue in terms of there was so much to do from an organizational standpoint, that it was, we did spend some time with our interpreter and learn the basics, but beyond that, it was difficult to find the time to become as conversant as we'd like to be. So that was certainly a big part of it.
Certainly. No, certainly. It's something that we often, I guess, undervalue until we're placed in that position, right? And certainly the bonding component between players, I can certainly see where that is confronted almost immediately when they first get into, arrive to you. Well, great. So I wanted to turn a bit now to kind of tracking your progress. Like I said, a bit more of the sports sciencey kind of aspect of your day-to-day workflows. I think that this is something that's certainly really intriguing to our listeners, and how, not just how we've worked together to develop, your use of Bridge, but taking kind of a higher level look at some of the processes that you've implemented and integrated into your performance program. So my first question to both of you is, how are you evaluating the success of the methodology that we've talked about, of the programming that you have in place?
Probably through a few different ways. So one would be attendance, who's participating, who's not participating. So it provides an opportunity to evaluate why, upgrade that side of it. looking at, the numbers then of what you're keeping track of. Are we getting stronger? Are we getting weaker? So that's another one. The injuries is obviously you want as many guys available as possible. So what's your injury rates, for the month, the week, the year, so forth, comparatively. And you can do that a number of different ways by amount of playing hours. We kind of follow the UEFA Champions League study, so we participate in that as it's an opportunity to look at yourself against other clubs across Europe. So yeah, I think attendance, your basic like testing metrics, are those improving, getting better, getting worse? Your overall kind of yearly stuff, wins and losses, injuries.
Mm-hmm.
I would say those would be the big ones. And do you have any?
Yeah, I would say, one of the things in our mission statement is that one of our objectives is to have all of our players available for every match, and in their best physical and mental condition. And obviously that's next to impossible, but that's certainly our objective. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's kind of the from a performance perspective, that would be kind of the key metric for us. Professional sports is a high stress results business, and usually the only result that really matters is the one on game day. Mm-hmm. So I would say for us, it's a combination of, are guys getting stronger in the gym? Are they moving better in terms of like functional movement screens?
Right.
That's something that we did initially out of the gate, and it was a priority for us because that was one of the challenges when we first did our first set of functional movement screens. We had a group of really poor movers. They lacked all kinds of mobility and stability and movement efficiency, and so that was one of the things in which we endeavored to improve. So are guys getting stronger? Are they moving better and more efficiently? And how is that manifesting itself in terms of keeping guys healthy? And then how does that relate to the total number of points our team has earned at the end of the season?
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, in terms of kind of the tracking component, have the tools that you've started to use, how have they affected the metrics that you're considering?
It's a great question. I think, that's the difficult thing with data. We always have to keep in mind that there was great programs out there before the advent of technology.
Were there really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Believe it or not, people won championships without GPS.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the world.
Totally. So you kind of got to keep that reality in check. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of it is, does it make your life easier so we can act better on our mission statement, which is, to be a positive role and force in the player and helping them be available. Mm-hmm. So if the technology is taking up more time that doesn't allow you to spend that time mm-hmm. with the athletes, then it's probably not a good return on your investment.
Totally.
It is helping you, right? Like there might be some initial setup that you have to do and, get used to, reworking your workflows. Mm-hmm. But if that's making your system more efficient so you can actually spend more time, and also as a practitioner, you spend less time chasing numbers and collating data and copy pasting spreadsheets. Mm-hmm. If you want to get where you're just clicking on one button and you see what you see. I get these periodically. I get these situations where, all the data goes in and I click one button and I'm like, wow, this just gave me everything I want to see. Like, I feel like I need to sit here for 2 more hours because this went all too fast,
Totally.
Because before you used to have to collate all that stuff and copy paste and, Now, once the machine is running, you're just looking at the product that's coming out at the end and saying, okay, how do we tweak the knobs on the machine to continue to give us a better product? And that's kind of, again, more that supply chain management situation. And so you're just trying to refine the process so you can spend more time. And I think, and Ed alluded to it, in pro sports, it's a high stress. You're here 7 days a week, essentially. And so all the staff, we talk about recovery for the players, but there's no recovery for the staff, because the team might be off, but guys are in because you have some injuries. And so your staff are almost working 7 days a week, where, your players might get the 1 day off a week or 2 days off. Yeah. And, I think to keep the staff motivated and keep them on top of things, they got to have their recovery time with their families as well. And, hopefully the data and the technology makes that possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's also because I think this was alluded to in Darcy's answer too. There's, in the last 4, 5, 6 years, there's kind of been this collective infatuation, I guess, with data and kind of what it can do. And I think the important aspect, data and artificial intelligence and whatever type of technology you want to employ to make your job more effective, mm-hmm. Is obviously important. But I think it's identifying your process first, and then identifying, once you've got your process, identifying what tools you need, what numbers you need to track. I don't know if you've ever read the book The Sports Gene by David Epstein, but
no.
I don't actually remember him saying it in the book, but I remember listening to him in an interview saying, kind of with the advent of all this technology, there's been so much interest in tracking something because you can, rather than thinking something is important because we can track it, rather than tracking it because we first thought it was important.
Right.
So I guess just making sure you identify what it is that is most important to you and to your coach and to your program, and then kind of building your structure around that idea.
No, definitely. I think that makes sense. And, we often talk about time management as one of those key drivers for internal success, right? Because nobody has enough hours in the day anymore. And if the tools that you're using you're wasting your time and you're too focused on the wrong thing because of the tool that you're using, it's no longer effective, right? Just because it's the hot new thing doesn't mean that it's right for what you're trying to do. And I think that that's a really valuable tip. So lastly, just a couple questions here, turning to, injury mitigation. I think a lot of people are very interested right now in, what are those kind of key metrics, key drivers that you all are considering that are kind of improving your success rate, right? Decreasing the chance of injury, if I can even go so far as to say that. I know that's a really finite thing to try and even talk about and track. But surely your players' longevity is evidence of your program's success. And I think it's an important thing to kind of speak to. So, regarding injury mitigation, what methods within your program have proved most beneficial for you all?
Yeah, I think overall, just having a balanced program. Mm-hmm. I think, as Ed said, having guys that move well, so they have good movement efficiency, good range of motion, good stability to be able to go through that motion. Then they have some requisite strength to execute on what it is they're being asked to do. They have good metabolic capacity to support that strength so they can repeatedly do it. And then they have a lifestyle that is appropriate. So they're getting enough sleep, they're eating well, they're getting all these pieces together in a holistic scenario. And I think really at the end of the day, that's all you can do, because as Ed mentioned, I think, avoiding injuries completely, this sport is essentially a 12-month a year sport. Like national team players get maybe 3 weeks off a year at any given, you get the day off here and there. But they pretty much in a whole year, they get 3 weeks off, and then it's back and away you go again.
Right.
So at some point they're going to get injured. You just hope it's not too bad, and you want to try and get them in circulation. I think sometimes the injury happens just because they do just need a break from it all. And so, I think all you can do is try and optimize all the different areas and hope they're making good decisions the rest of the 22 hours. They're not at the training facility or training per se, and go from there. So, and everyone's got their own belief system around that and how that should operate. So, that's where things start to get complicated quickly. We think there's certain things are important, and the player might think other things are important, and they have other things kind of vying for their attention. Takes them away from what we think is important. So, trying to keep them going full circle and moving forward.
Yeah, and I also think too, it's I don't think we want to take credit necessarily for the longevity of certain players. I mean, what we do is we try to give them the best possible scientific evidence and lifestyle habits and the things that they can do in the gym, on the pitch, at home, on vacation. Give them basically all the tools so they can make the best decisions to be the most professional player they can be. But at the end of the day, those decisions come down to them.
Right.
And so some guys are way better at it than others, and the guys who, not always, some guys luck out based on great genetics, but most of the time, if I think when you play the odds, you tend to win, and the guys who do a better job in the gym, at home, getting the right amount of sleep, eating well, doing all the things we know helps produce better performance over a longer period of time. They tend to be successful, and it produces a good career, obviously combined with a lot of talent.
Right. Right. No, but it sounds like there's certainly a high level of trust that goes both ways, right? Trust in you all, and trust in your athletes to make sure best you can that they're doing hopefully what they need to be doing when they're not with you. And I would say that now ties into communication to kind of sum it all up as to the last bit of the last topic that we discussed, right? If you don't have that semblance of communication and trust in place, things can unravel.
Yeah, I think one of the things we said when we first met the players, which we continue to say, we would love nothing more that at the end of the year they had such a great season that they could come and ask for more money.
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, then that means they've been successful, and if they're successful, we're successful.
Yeah.
And so it is, at the end of the day, it is a team sport. And I think if you use that analogy of a team playing on a pitch or a court or on a field, it's the team that wins. It's no one person that gets going. So the defender's got to roll, the goalie's got to roll. Everyone's got a responsibility in the process. And at the end of the day, the team either wins or loses. And so for us, it's making sure that we're just trying to give them every opportunity to express their talents. And so we're gonna try and encourage them best we can, but I'm not going to chase anybody down and force them to do something that they don't want to do. Because at the end of the day, like Ed said, they got to want to do it.
Yep.
And they got to drive their own car. I can't drive it for them, and Ed can't drive it for them. And they got to have that responsibility, because we're just one kind of stop on the highway of their career.
Yep.
And we just want to make sure that when they come on our section of highway, they can drive fast, have fun, and enjoy it.
Yeah. Totally. No, I think that's, again, great advice. It makes a lot of sense. So last question I have for you to conclude here, and something we always like to ask is, what's your greatest accomplishment been working together at Roma?
Oh, man, I would say Roma itself, just the experience. Yeah. It's been a massive experience. I would say, the learning for me over the last 3 years have been massive. Definitely, I tell Ed frequently, I probably would have packed it in a long time ago, but it wasn't here to be a sounding board and support and all that kind of stuff. And in days like, hey, Darce, come on, we got to keep rolling. So yeah, I think it's the experience itself. And, I don't know if we accomplished anything per se besides just doing what we enjoy doing and working with a bunch of great people here, and that we're also a big part of this process. So it's not just Ed and I by any stretch. It's a group of people all doing it. So I'd have to group it into the experience itself the whole time here.
Yeah, I guess I would say, because during the time that those 2 years I was consulting, I saw so much fragmentation within the group, and guys kind of straying off the reservation for all their performance needs. I would say, from a team perspective, in terms of what we set out to do, and to kind of get back to your question about what the greatest accomplishment is, I think it is kind of instilling a culture, a process, confidence in that process on behalf of the players. And I think a lot of that starts and stops with the mission statement. And players knowing that we believe in it. I was thinking of something the other day that's recently come full circle, because when our first, it was probably the first, 6 or 8 weeks we were here, and one of our very young players got hurt, and I was working with him in the gym, and he told me that what was happening would never have happened previously. And I said, well, what do you mean? What's happening? He said, you're the first team strength and conditioning coach, and you're working with me. I'm a young player. I was just on our second team last year, and this, a first team coach would never have worked with me in the past. And so that us kind of treating everyone exactly the same, regardless of, they were a 19-year-old who had never been on the first team before, to, one of our superstars who gets paid, a lot of money. We've treated everyone the same. And like I say, it came full circle, because that same guy, in our last match, started his first match for us on the first team. And so that gave me, and I hadn't mentioned it to Darcy yet, but I think it gives us a tremendous sense of pride that we treated everyone the same. We gave everyone all the same opportunity to be successful, and this guy worked his tail off and prepared the way we asked him to, and when his opportunity came, he was ready and he performed well. And so I would say that is also I would consider a big accomplishment.
Very, very good point.
Yeah.
Teary-eyed.
I would say that is, you should definitely be tremendously proud of yourselves for not just what you've started and implemented there, but what you've accomplished together and the success that the team's seen because of it. It's truly, truly very impressive. And I'm certainly of honored to have been able to work with you guys at Roma. I think it's been such fun. Really, we've had a lot of fun with implementing some of the bridge system and getting to hear more about your success and basically your entire process, because I do think that it's very unique, especially in the environment of which you guys are in and have found yourselves in. So, well, that sums up my questions. I just want to say thank you both so much for joining me today. I think our listeners have quite a lot to get through and learn from. And I'll also say we'll follow up with some additional material, and maybe I'll even ask you all to send over some photos of the gym that you all were describing at the beginning. And do you want to tell everybody quickly, our listeners, where they can kind of reach you?
Yeah, so given the two things, probably one is Ed and I are both not social media guys for two reasons. One, we're too busy.
No, fair enough.
The second being that Rome is a very unique, difficult media landscape, and they take any kind of information and skew it to their narrative. So we're very cautious about what we put out there. So those are two things. But with that said, I have a Twitter at Darcy Norman. And that's probably the one place if you want to chat further or more without giving my email out. I don't want to get inundated with a bunch of stuff, especially if general population people can listen to this. So yeah, you can always instant message me on Twitter, and if you have questions, happy to try and answer whatever I can in the time I can do it.
Yeah, like Darcy mentioned, we keep a pretty small digital footprint, but I'm at on Twitter. I'm at EWO Fitness, and with that said, if people do want to email me, I have a couple accounts. So if people wanted to email me at just Ed Lippy, no dot, all lowercase, edlippy@gmail.com. They're certainly welcome to do that, and I can't promise that I would respond to every email, but I would do my best, and always happy to exchange ideas with other coaches if I've got the time, and that's where people can reach me also.
Ed just threw me into the box, so I'm gonna have to give you mine now.
I was gonna go first.
Yeah. So mine is, I'll give you my same. It's Tahoe, TAHOE, Norman, no space, at gmail.com. Norman, NORMAN, at gmail.com. You can email me there again with questions, and I'm always happy to help where I can. So. Thanks,
guys. No, and for everybody listening, there are also some master coaches of ours. So, feel free to email Maya at bridgeathletic.com, MAIA at bridgeathletic.com, and I'm sure I can send over some questions as well to the guys here. So again, Ed, Darcy, thank you so much for joining me today. Really, really great to catch up and to hear about your success and everything that's gone so well at Roma, and look forward to having you all on again at some point.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And I just also want to thank our staff. I know it's Ed and I on this conversation, but it's a work of people that have put all these pieces in place. So it's certainly not just Ed and I. It's our doctors, our physios, fitness coaches that have had the open mindset to take on all this new stuff that they weren't familiar with prior. And so, yeah, they've been a great help and a great group of people, and definitely massive thanks to the group.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks guys so much, and everyone else, you'll see us next time. Thanks again for listening to Powering Performance, brought to you by Bridge Athletic. If you like our show and want to know more about Bridge, check out www.bridgeathletic.com, and please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.